Hey everyone, I'm Rachel Bateman, and today's video is about what Stephen King gets wrong about plotting. I fully recognize how absurd it seems for me to step in and be like, Stephen King, dude, you're doing it wrong, considering the career he's had and the success he's found. But here I am doing it anyway, because I have been listening to the audiobook of On Writing. Now, I read this book more than a decade ago and really enjoyed it, and I still really enjoy it. But as I'm listening to it, it is reminding me of something that I had an issue with the first time around, and that is his view on plotting. And his view is that plotting won't give you a good story. It won't give you a good book, because in order for a good, true book to come out of you, you have to excavate it. You have to dig it out like a fossil, and it's fully formed, and you just have to let it go. Basically, you have to be a pantser. You have to be a discovery writer in order to tell the truth and not just have this cardboard, formulaic, forced, boring book. He spends several pages more eloquently stating that than what I just did. But that's what it boils down to. Plotting sucks. Plotting is for losers. Plotting won't get you anywhere. Books that are plotted are crappy, shitty books. And that if you want to write beautiful, wonderful, amazing books that readers love, you need to just let it naturally and intuitively flow out of you. Two things wrong with that in my mind. One, not having any kind of idea of what you're doing is what leads to things like Under the Dome and that total trash heap of an ending. Sorry, Steve. I love a lot of your books, but like, you just realized you had 800 pages and it needed to end, so you just ended it. But two, it presupposes that anyone who plots ahead of time doesn't have an intuitive or organic way of discovering their story. And that is just wrong. Sure, maybe there are some people who just like plug in things into a list and this is what happens and we go on and everything's super formulaic and just they use random generators for everything and there's nothing organic about their story. Sure, that probably happens. But myself and every other outliner and plotter that I've ever talked to has mentioned that I discover so much while I am writing. So much of my process, no matter how intense my outline is discovery. I mean, I have, and I've showed this before on the channel, but here I am again. When I write a book, I have a notebook. This thing it's intense. And this is what I outline in. I figure out my characters and their backstories and the whole thing in this before I start writing. It is wildly detailed, and I spend months plotting my story. I spend months outlining before I write. And still, every time I write, I am surprised by things, and I discover things, and things organically happen during the writing process, and I am a discovery writer. People seem to think that being a discovery writer or a pantser means that you go in completely blind and you don't know what you're doing and you just figure it all out as you go. You can discover things in your writing even if you have fully outlined. The other thing is, I think there's actually a breakdown between me and Steve and what we think plot is, because he goes on and on about how nowhere in the book is there a plot, and I don't plot because there's just narration that moves you from A to B and dialogue and character. Well, to actually correctly quote Ray Bradbury this time, instead of botching it like I did a couple videos ago, remember, plot is no more than footprints left in the snow after your characters have run by on their way to incredible destinations. That narration that he talks about, that moves the story from point A to B to C all the way to the end, that's plot. He plots. He plots his books in his head as he's writing. And it's fine. Like, yes, I am being very pedantic right now and really like getting in and mincing the words, but I'm doing that for a reason. And that is because this is one of the best-selling books about writing, written by one of the best-selling authors of all time. And a lot of new writers are picking this book up and they're reading it as if this is the gospel truth and how you have to do it. And I have talked to so many writers who come to me wanting help getting through their book because they've been working on it for months or years or sometimes more than a decade, and they are resistant to the idea of maybe take a step back and outline your book first. Work through your plot first. Figure out your characters first, because Steve told them that that's how you write a shitty book. Steve told them that if you want to write a good book, you have to sit down at the typewriter with nothing more than a situation and just go. And that's how you do it. And I've talked to so many authors and aspiring authors and writers who are absolutely stuck because if it works for Steve, and look at his career, it's the way to do it. And that is my gripe with basically all writing advice, whether it's coming from someone like Stephen King or from anyone here on YouTube or put out on Instagram, is that when someone gives writing advice, and this includes me, when we give writing advice, what we are saying is, this is what has worked for me. Or sometimes, I have talked to a lot of authors, and this seems to be the general consensus of what works well for a lot of people. But when you write a book, and you tell all your fans that this is the way to do it, that doesn't work, because we are all unique individuals. We all have our own way of working and our own methods of figuring things out. And the important thing is that we figure out what works best for us. And when you have someone who says the way to do it, the only way to write a good book is this, that can really hinder the process for a lot of writers, especially newer writers who are trying to figure it out, because they feel like if they turn to something like the Blake Snyder beat sheet or a story circle or any kind of the hero's journey, any kind of structure, that they're just going to default to writing a crappy formulaic book. That they aren't going to be a real writer, that they are not going to be writing the truth, that there's not going to be any kind of intuition or organic discovery of the story if they do that. And that is a load of crap. Because you know the difference between plotters and pantsers is that people who outline ahead of time, they organically and intuitively find their story at the outline phase. And people who go in with just a vague idea of what they want and then they write their way through, they organically and intuitively find their story as they are writing. We are all finding our story organically. We are all using intuition to create our stories. It's just a matter of when that happens. So to say, if you do something ahead of time, if you outline, you're not going to have any intuition, you're not going to be telling your truth, it's not going to be natural, it's not going to be organic, that's a load of shit. That is not how it works. And now I love this book. There are so many good things in it. And in fact, my writing guides video just a few videos back, this is the first one I suggested. And I still suggest it, even if I don't agree with everything he says. I do think there are a lot of things here worth taking. And honestly, if just going into the situation and finding your way through as you write, the way Stephen King does, works for you, that is excellent. Just because I outline ahead of time does not mean you need to outline ahead of time. Like I said before, we all figure out what works best for us and what that process is. There is no one way to write a good intuitive book. There is no one way to tell your truth through fiction. There is no one way to get the story from your head to the page. And there is no one way to follow your characters and figure out where they are going with this. We always talk about plotting versus pantsing. I mean, even the title of this video is plotting versus pantsing. But that's not really it. Because we are all plotters and we are all pantsers. We've made it into this huge binary where if you're a plotter, you figure out everything down to every teeny nitty gritty detail in these outlines, and you have character sheets and you're following a formula and everything is there. And if you're a pantser, you're just like, I might have a character name and here I go, I figure it out. And that's not how any of us work. In fact, Steve goes ahead and proves that to us in his own book, because he's talking about how there is no plot. You don't plot ahead of time if you want to be natural. You just need a situation, and then you take that situation and you roll with it. And then he goes on to say, you know, this isn't a textbook, so I don't give a lot of exercises, but I have one for you. I'm going to give you a situation, and I need you to write 5 or 6 unplotted pages of narrative about it. When he first talks about situation in here, he gives you little one-line things, like Misery is 2 characters in a house. That's his situation. Gerald's game is 1 woman in a bedroom. The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon is one kid lost in the woods. Super, super, very, very short situations. Other situations he gives are based on what-if questions. What if vampires invaded a small New England village, Salem's Lot? What if a policeman in a remote Nevada town went berserk and started killing everyone in sight? Desperation. What if a cleaning woman suspected of a murder she got away with, her husband, fell under suspicion for a murder she did not commit, her employer, Dolores Claiborne? And what if a young mother and her son become trapped in their stalled car by a rabid dog, Cujo? What if questions, what if questions, what if questions. Now, side note, in my plotting workbook, not like mine with my cover, but the one that I send out for people, on the how to find ideas and where to find ideas, what if? That is what I talk about. Ask yourself what ifs, because your ideas for your stories often do stem from a situation. He's absolutely right here. But where I'm going with this is this exercise he then gives is, I'm going to give you a situation. And instead of giving us a one-line what if situation, he says 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 lines short of 4 full pages of setup and characters and their interactions and their relationships and backstory and what things have happened between them and where we're at and. He doesn't give us the one-line situation he says that you should have to start a book. He gives us a lot more pre-writing work that he does right here. When he tells us not to do work ahead of time and just sit down and write, that's not what he's doing, because that's not how our brains work. When we come up with a situation, we're not just like, hey, what if this girl gets sent to stay with her dad's family who she doesn't know in Montana for a summer? That's my, what if for this book. But it doesn't just stop there and what if, and it's like, okay, brain, stop thinking. You've got a situation. Wait till you can sit down and write before you think anything out. We are constantly going in the background and our brains are working. And whether we're writing that down in an outline or in a workbook or just a little notebook, whether we're jotting it down on a cocktail napkin or whatever, we are thinking. We are forming the story. We are forming the plot. We are getting to know the characters in the back of our mind. We are doing all that work. And Stephen King does that work too. He just doesn't call it plotting because he doesn't. So I recognize that this was kind of just like a rant about Stephen King, but I do adore him and I love on writing, and I think that I've shown this book like 35 times in this video. I think this is an excellent, excellent book. And if you are a writer or interested in writing or just like reading about like how authors do it, even if you don't write, this is definitely one worth getting. The whole point of this is that we have to take it all with a grain of salt, because writing advice is not universal. Writing processes are not universal. Every one of us does things a little bit differently from the other writers. Every one of us has to figure out what works best for us. And if that means that complete discovery writing, just sitting down with nothing but the one sentence situation, is how you do it, absolutely, by all means, keep doing it. But if that means that you plot ahead of time so you have a roadmap to follow as you are writing your first draft, do that. Figure out what works for you. And part of figuring out what works for you is trying different things. If you have been spending your entire writing career trying to discovery write through every book you have and sit down with just your premise and get go, and you peter out at 20 or 30,000 words in every book and never finish, can I suggest you try pre-plotting a book? Work out all the kinks before you start on the prose. Give it a shot. Maybe you hate it and it doesn't work for you, and that's totally fine. You don't have to keep doing it. But if you're stuck and what you're trying isn't working for you, try something else. Now, if you are outlining and plotting because you've listened to someone like me who's a big plotter, and then you feel like, well, I already did this and I plotted it and I'm bored and I don't want to write it and it's not working for you, try sitting down and pantsing a book. Sit down with nothing more than a vague idea and see where it takes you. See what you figure out along the way. Try different things to find out what works for you individually. And recognize that sometimes what works for you might change. Maybe you've been a pantser for your entire writing life and suddenly you're having a hard time making it through a book. You're stuck, you don't know what's going on, and you're just not getting there. Take a step back and try outlining. Or maybe you've been a plotter your whole writing life and then now it's just feeling stale and like it's not working for you anymore. Write a book without plotting. Give it a shot. We don't have to stick with what we've done in the past just because that's what we've done in the past. That's one of the great things about something like writing and any kind of creative endeavor. We can try it in a bunch of different ways. You don't have to stick with the same way every single time. Something I do want to address about outlining and plotting ahead of time, because anytime I see a video about this on YouTube, this is bound to come up in the comments and someone's going to have something to say about it, so I'm just going to go ahead and do that here. That is that using things like the Blake Snyder beat sheet, or the nutshell technique, or story circles, all of which I obviously use and enjoy, that doesn't mean you're going to write a formulaic story, because these things are not formulas. They are structure, and that is very, very different. Could you look at a beat sheet and just run through it and come up with something that's very formulaic? Sure, absolutely. Anyone can do that. But could you look at this same beat sheet and just look at structure, the kind of flow and pacing that readers have come to expect, and what will help pull them through your book and guide the ideas that are coming to you into those spaces? I'm not saying force it. Don't force something to work, and don't force something to go into a place just because Blake Snyder says that's where it goes. But you can take the ideas that are forming organically and intuitively and use that as a guide for how to place them so your book will have that flow that will pull readers along. You don't have to be writing to a formula. Pre-plotting and using structure guides is not writing to formula. Okay, I think I've ranted long enough. My battery is kind of screaming at me right now, so hopefully I could finish this before it turns off on me. I'm actually going to drop a video next Monday on how to quickly plot. Yes, Stephen, I said plot your book for NaNoWriMo with only a week left. I'm seeing a lot of people who want to jump in and try NaNoWriMo, maybe for the first time, sometimes as a returning Rimo, and are starting to get really stressed because November starts in less than 2 weeks and they have nothing. So I'm going to drop a quick video of just some really simple action steps you could take to kind of have an idea of what your book is going to be and wrap your mind around it so you are ready to go on November 1st. That will be here next Monday, so you will have a week to work with it before you dive in and start writing your NaNoWriMo book. I'm really excited to share that with you. I am Rachel Bateman. If you have not subscribed to my channel, go ahead and do so now and hit that little bell so you can follow along with my future videos. If this video is helpful for you, or if you just like me ranting about Stephen King, go ahead and give it a thumbs up, and I will see you back here Monday to talk about plotting your NaNoWriMo book.